seconds? All right. For you who don't know, some of the bigs... Oh, can folks hear me now?
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to speak up. So on October 2nd, some of the big women's rights organizations, Planned Parenthood, NOW, and some of the other NGOs have called a mass protest to defend abortion rights. And you know what? I'd say it's about fucking time.
Yeah.
For way too long, the dominant strategy of these groups has not been to mobilize their base for a full-throated defense of abortion, but to fight through the courts, through lobbying, through fundraising, through calling your senator, and worst of all, by downplaying the centrality of abortion rights to women's and gender liberation. They don't even say the word abortion sometimes.
That's right.
But guess what? We all know that none of that has been enough to stop the offensive of the right against our rights.
Right.
The only way we're going to stop the rollback is by telling that archaic, unaccountable, slavery-era institution, the Supreme Court, that we are not going to roll over and hand our rights and futures away. We're going to fight back.
Yeah.
The latest law in Texas is not just an abortion ban. It criminalizes everyone down to the cab driver who might aid and abet a pregnant person who dares to decide what to do with their own body. This reveals what we already knew. The right wants to fully control the bodies of women and people who can become pregnant by pushing us back to the days before Roe v. Wade. In fact, we know these efforts will never actually eliminate abortions. They will only make them accessible to the rich and white. Poor and working class people, especially people of color, will be made to have children they do not want or cannot afford to have, while putting their very lives at risk. This gives life to the idea that the right has the moral high ground because they care so damn much about life. Guess what? They don't care if women and trans and gender non-conforming people die.
Right.
We need access to safe, legal abortion. The Democrats are also at fault here because they've begun to treat abortion for years now as if it's a single issue fight that we can sidestep when it's convenient for winning elections in red states. This isn't a single issue protest. This is about gender and economic justice. Abortions cost as much as $300 to $1,500 a year, and that's just in the first trimester. This is unacceptable at a time when people in the U.S. can't afford an emergency $400 expense. And after a pandemic that left many tens of people unable to even afford rent, we have an eviction crisis. We shouldn't have a healthcare crisis as well. This is about racial justice. Not only will Texas law have the worst impact on women of color, Texas is also already the state with the highest maternal mortality rate for black women. We need to say abortion rights are part of what it will take to make Black Lives Matter in this country.
Yeah.
Abortion is an immigrant justice issue. Last year in Georgia, they sterilized immigrant women at a privately run ICE detention center. This isn't just about the right not to have kids. It's about the right to have kids if and when we choose. That's reproductive justice.
Yes.
And we need to get our unions on board because from Ireland to Argentina, wherever they've had a successful fight for abortion rights, it's through mobilizing the power of labor and the power of the strike weapon to bring the courts to our knees.
Yeah.
And I'm at time, so I'm just going to say one last thing. We have history on our side and we have the numbers on our side. It's still the case that 60% of people in this country support the right to legal, safe abortion. We need to give them a movement they deserve, and we need to give ourselves the movement we deserve by mobilizing ourselves in the tens of hundreds of millions of thousands.
Let's do it.
We demand safe, legal abortion, free, on demand, and without apology. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Haley. A couple of words, and shout out in solidarity to the brothers, sisters, and others from the city workforce who kept this post running. even as the city leadership divested everything and left them to die. So I'm glad to see them out here protesting before reopening tomorrow. Let's be honest. 5 years ago, we had unprecedented numbers to pour into D.C. at a women's march when Trump was elected, and there was palpable fear in this country that things would turn backwards. And now things are continuing to turn in the wrong direction, and our numbers are much fewer than where they need to be. Okay? That is a problem for us. That is a huge problem. And I'm worried, as I'm sure everybody else here is worried, that there is a notion among many, many of our friends, many of our co-workers, and many of our classmates that things are not going to go backwards under a Biden administration. That some sort of dead man switch, like on the subway, clicks in and stops shit from getting so bad. Well, if the last 19 months have taught us anything, is that the system does not have a dead man switch. We can go backwards. We are going backwards, and we will go backwards if we do not organize and we do not fight, regardless of who is in the White House. We had mass mobilizations in the 80s and the 90s, and God help us into the early 2000s that stopped them from getting to where we are now. And in that period of time, we had both Democrats and Republicans in charge. Sometimes, as both under Obama and Clinton, where they not only controlled the White House, but as today, they controlled Congress. And things went backward then too. They did. Don't kid yourself. We had greater restrictions. And Lord knows we've had an ideological reaction. We now have part of the left that is questioning whether or not they should be out here. Not just because they're questioning mass protest, but they're questioning abortion rights, period. We have some conversations to have with our coworkers and our classmates and our communities and our spouses and our friends and our lovers. Because we are going backwards without a fight, and they will preside over it and say pretty words. And they will do it with a multi-culti, multi-ethnic rainbow flags to wrap it up. We cannot rely on anybody. Even the Supreme Court, when it stopped short of reversing abortion in '89, said this. After the mass mobilizations in D.C., they said, we are in danger of losing legitimacy in the eyes of the American public should we reverse Roe v. Wade. How would they know that today if we are not out there in huge numbers? They will not know that. There will not be the direction given to them. That will go in the opposite direction. They think they're all right and they're not okay. Nobody is coming to save us but us. We've got a lot of work to organize. You all get it. You're here. Let's get out there and start organizing with our comrades and not allow a moment in which the largest socialist left that is organizing my lifetime sits down in a moment when they should be standing up and mobilizing their comrades. Come out here with us. Where are you, DSA? Come out here. We want to stand with you, comrades.
Which is the Faculty and Staff Union at the City University of New York. I'm also a queer woman from the South, and as a Southerner, I want to start by saying that the South is where most black people in the U.S. live, and so for anyone who's trying to write off the South, like, fuck the South, fuck the Republicans, we can't do that, because that's leaving people behind, and Republicans aren't in power in those states because most people in those states are Republicans. They're in power in those states because of centuries of gerrymandering, voter suppression, and capitalist exploitation, which keeps people in poverty, and poverty makes it harder to vote and participate in the political process in other ways. So with that out of the way, I also want to talk about why it's important for me to be here, not just as an individual who supports abortion rights, and not just as a member of a socialist organization, but also as a union member. We heard from speakers earlier about how vital unions have been to the fights for abortion rights in other places, and that's true and important. In my union, we just passed a resolution in support of the Palestinian people, which has sparked a lot of conversation, not just about that topic, but about what the role of unions should be, and is it our business to be supporting people in other places? And I say, yes, of course it is. I refuse to choose between supporting my colleagues and supporting workers around the world. I do both, always. Being a socialist means a lot of different things to me, but one of the things it means to me is that I really believe in the phrase, workers of the world unite. And so as workers, it's our job to fight for our fellow union members, but also for the other unions in our city and in our state, and in solidarity with the workers in Texas and every other state and territory controlled by the U.S., and for workers all around the world who are victims of imperialism, mostly perpetrated by the U.S., and people who are dealing with all kinds of other kinds of oppression and exploitation. So that's why I'm here today representing Rafa, and not just Let's Voice, and not just here as an individual. So if you're fortunate like me to be part of a workplace that's already unionized, I encourage you to talk with your union members about how you can collectively fight for things like abortion and for other kinds of justice and human rights. And if you're not in a unionized workplace, you don't need a union to talk to your co-workers about justice. Thank you.
So, I'm with NYC for abortion rights. I just want to talk a little more about how we've gotten to this point with abortion bounty hunters in Texas. And we talked a lot about how we've allowed Democrats to demobilize us and channel all of our energy into voting and into donating money. And I think that's definitely a big part of why we're here right now. But another big part of the story, I think, is we've had decades and decades of organized street harassment in front of abortion clinics, people stalking abortion doctors and patients, clinic protests, clinic violence. It's gotten dramatically worse in the past few years, and we've had basically no left response to that. We've kind of just allowed it to happen. We haven't been in the streets to stigmatize them. We've just allowed it. We've allowed the stigma to take hold, and we've let them fill the vacuum in the streets. They own the streets in front of clinics. That's not us, that's them. Those are their streets. And that's, I think that's how we've gotten here. Like Megan said earlier, this isn't just a South problem or a Midwest problem. It's right here. Under our noses. That's right. There's an evangelical group from North Carolina called Love Life. They have totally overrun clinics there. Hundreds and thousands of protesters all the time. And they have a New York City chapter now. Like, they're here. They're bringing hundreds of people to clinics here. They're live streaming it like it's a football game. That's happening here every single weekend. And there's also clinic harassment coordinated by the Archdiocese of New York. Every single weekend. It used to just be the first Saturday of the month. Now it's every Saturday. And it's in Brooklyn. It's in Staten Island. I think it's in the Bronx is the other place they go. It's just all the time now. And their leader is a guy named Fidelis Bazinski. He's a Franciscan friar. And he's a clinic invader. He invades clinics all the fucking time. Not in New York, but all over the country. He invades clinics. He's responsible for like easily half or more of all clinic invasions in the past few years. And he's working with the Archdiocese of New York to lead antis to our clinics here in New York, like all the time. And not only that, he gets a police escort to do it. The NYPD works with him. They call them up and they get an escort. And they have actually arrested 2 of our members. We're just standing out there with signs in the streets to oppose them. They brought out the Strategic Response Group, the SRG, the very militarized RoboCops. They arrested 2 of us. And they have an actual clinic invader that they can then lead to the entrance. Like, this is backwards. That's right. Actually, it's not backwards. That's exactly how it's supposed to work, with the cops and the church and the state all working together. It's not backwards, I should say. It's actually very right side up.
The way they make.
But I don't know. I just want to finish by saying that Judith Butler recently in an interview called TERF, like anti-trans TERF ideology, one of the dominant strains of fascism in our time. And I think that's true, and I think another dominant strain is the anti-abortion movement.
Yes.
So it demands an anti-fascist response, and the anti-fascist response is in the streets, it's confronting it, and it's not waiting for it to go away. So,
We should have the right to free health care. And it's workers like Angelique and like the healthcare workers who are here, the doctors and the nurses that saved our asses during the pandemic wearing fucking trash bags. Those are the folks who we need to trust. Those healthcare workers, they know. No one's coming to save us, like Cheryl Wolf said. Only our strength in the streets, in our workplaces, to speak with our co-workers like Olivia was telling us to do. That's what we need to do, and that's what we need to do to build a movement towards October 2nd, where we can be in the streets with strength, making the connections, and saying that the right to an abortion is part of the fight for Black lives, it's part of an immigrants' rights movement, it's part of a right for free public health care under worker control, and that we have the right to bodily autonomy. Trans folks have the right to gender-affirming surgery for free whenever they want it. Folks have the right to abortions for free whenever they want it, without apology. And so, let's build a left contingent for October 2nd, y'all. No, we know. No one's coming to save us. Not the Democrats, not the Supreme Court. It is up to us. So please hang out, talk with folks. I'm super excited to meet everyone here. So let's hang out, let's get to know each other, and let's build a movement, y'all. Thanks so much for coming.